Right, okie dokie. So, I don't know by what arrogance I thought I could do a century in an hour. We've muddled along the last couple of weeks. It gets busier and busier from time, more and more information each week that we've got to try and get our way through. It's fun trying to track it all down. What do we miss out? What's the important part of it? What do we want to focus on? So last week we had a lot of focus on movement of rabbis because we had the beginning of established Ashkenazi Jewry, although as we learned last week, Ashkenaz was a lot older, as was Sepharad, Italy. But as an established center, it begins in the 10th century with Reb Gershon Meir Hagolam going into the 11th century, and we did him and Rashi mainly last week, the beginning of codification of the law with the Rif. This week, though, we've got two centers that we need to look at, Ashkenaz and Sfard. And when I say Ashkenaz, two areas in particular, France, although a little bit into Germany, the Rhineland, and England. England during this period that we're doing this century, the 12th century, sees some terrible, terrible massacres. A lot of them endorsed by the church, some of them tried to be stopped by the royalty. And a lot of that happens because of one interesting aspect of Jewish life at that time. Jews were not allowed to be citizens anywhere in Europe at this point, in Christian Europe. Let's leave aside Muslim Europe, but in Christian Europe, we were not allowed to be citizens anywhere. And after the Crusades, which began last week, 1096, although we will have a look at the immediate aftermath of the destruction, because we didn't have much time to complete that last week. We'll look at what took place in France and in England in 1096, 1098 and onwards, because the Second Crusade, which takes place 1145 to 1150, has an impact on Jewish law. Rabbeinu Tam, who is the grandson of Rashi, has to confirm, re-establish a number of edicts done by Rabbeinu Gershon Meir Hagolah, because in the ensuing century since, Jewish life had been turned upside down because of the Crusades, and also because of the relationship. What was the relationship? The Jews needed to have protection. There is a lot of violence that grew out from the Crusades. Even though the Crusades, the whole point of it was to liberate the Holy Land from the Muslims, in the words of all of their rabble-rousers, why wait to go to the infidels out in the Holy Land before we wet our swords? Let's drink the blood of the Christ killers now. Sorry, my apologies, I should not have actually. It's a word that we try not to use. It means Mashiach, but I will try not to utilize that word too often. But let us go and kill them now. So we needed a lot of protection. But the Gentiles also needed the Jews to be protected. We've got a lot of struggle between royalty and the church over who is going to rule the land. The church obviously is trying to push its upper hand. It has the ear of the masses, but the church, the royalty, owns the land. And so who is able to actually impose taxes? So even though the royalty, which was the official government, although, as you all know from the signing of the Magna Carta, royalty itself can be reined in when enough influential people tell them, we want you to change. But they're trying to, their greatest problem at the moment was church itself. The church will tax people against the will of the government. So who is the government, who is the royalty and the government turning to for their salvation? The Jews. The Jews are the ones who are able to do it. Why? This goes it started in Germany, made it in Germany. Well, Germany didn't exist, but that area of what we refer now to as Germany, and it made its way to England as well. A non-citizen has got no rights whatsoever. If he's murdered, then if he was murdered, the murderer would not be punished. If you provided a stranger with any lodging, you are responsible for the stranger's actions, which meant that people were not going to offer hospitality. The non-citizen's property and possessions did not actually have a legal owner. They could be repossessed by anyone. If he dies, the heirs have got no inheritance rights whatsoever. In order to get them, they need to be protected by a powerful individual, such as a prince, a baron, or whatever he might be. He'd have to pay taxes. If he doesn't, he becomes a slave. That's the rule of a non-citizen. Because Jews are non-citizens, they become the property, and everything they own becomes the property of the royalty. And because the Jews, even then, were recognized as good businessmen, they are able to constantly fill up the coffers of the royalty. And we have Jews being sold and bartered. We've got Pedro I of Aragon gives the monastery of Leer half of the customs due to the Jews, or half the custom Jews of Ruesta. The next year he gives to a church in Huesca all the tithes he received, and we see the Jews being bartered. And Louis VI takes the revenue from the Jews of Touraine and gives it to the Abbey of Saint Martin in Tours. So a Jew is a valuable gift and is able to bring money into the community. But because of this, and even when you've got the right of Jews to have Christian slaves, we have in 1084, the Bishop of Speyer, Rudiger, the Bishop of Speyer, allows Jews to have a Christian slave, but that was only in order to pump up his own coffers, because if a Jew has a slave, is able to advance a little bit more, and their money at the end of the day is always going to belong to the crown or whoever it is that is ruling them. Henry VI, Henry IV goes mad about the massacre of the Jews in 1096, and he takes all the money from the murderers. What does he do with that money? Does he give it to the survivors? No, he takes that money, keeps it for himself. So this relationship of the Jew with the Christian authority, either from the church or from the royalty, meant that the only profession open to us was, of course, money lending, and that remains until today, accused of what it is that we are trying to achieve. We've got in the middle of our century Peter of Cluny, or Cluny, C-L-U-N-Y. Don't know exactly where it is.
Cluny.
Sorry?
Cluny. Just before you carry on, did you say that Jews could be owned by the ruling party? They
in essence were owned by the ruling party, because we had no rights as citizens, and so therefore we had to go to the ruling party for protection. And that in essence meant that all of our possessions were subject to whatever the ruling party decided to do with them. We weren't slaves, but we were serfs with no rights. So he writes that the Peter of Cluny in France, when the Jews make the long journey to Paris, they go so rich that they own half of the city, and they've got Christians as manservants, as maidservants. They've openly slid from the faith of Yoshi. They become Judaized. And in the Bible, it says you are only allowed to lend money, usury, to a stranger. They have seen every single Christian as a stranger. The problem is that there were hardly any poor Jews in Paris. Why? Because of the cohesiveness of the community. It wasn't because we owned all the money. We were a very cohesive unit, and we looked after each other. And therefore, it just reinforced the concept that the Jew was just the money bag, the money lender, and he's just looking to take money off from the poor, honest, hardworking Christian. And now you can understand what happens in the First Crusade and in 1096 when they're about to set off for their crusade. Anyone who owed any money, any Christian, any non-Jew immigrant who owned any money, owned it to a Jew. The Jew was one who lent him his money. He's about to go off on a holy crusade to the Holy Land. He's got a lot of debts. So what does he do first? Kills the Jew. Once you kill the Jew, the owner of the debt, that's it. You're a free man. Your wife and kids are perfectly all right. In fact, they went first to borrow money and then went and killed them. Why they didn't just steal it in the first place, I don't know. But it was a whole process that they went through. And so the Jews at this point don't know what to do. We have a number of accounts, three main accounts as to what took place with the Jews at this point. And I'm just going to jump back to Europe at Mainz. We've got Bishop Ruthard. There are 12,000 soldiers getting away to go out to the Crusades, but they go along to the Jewish quarter. They are held at bay for 2 days, but afterwards they kill everyone. What's in wait? Either die by the sword or to be converted. And even if they converted, there was no proof, there's no guarantee that they were going to be rescued or saved because of that. And we've got three narratives. They're known as the Anonymous of Mainz. Another one is written by Shlomo ben Shimshon, and a third of Rabbi Elazar bar Nosson. And they give an account of what goes through. And it would seem that for the majority of them, they took their own lives in martyrdom rather than converting. Although, as we'll see later on, there's a whole machlokes whether what they did was right, what they did was wrong, and how they're supposed to go about it. Yes, David Kennedy, you have to unmute yourself.
Question, technical perhaps. So if the Jews converted, did they then become citizens? Or was that not in the equation?
In 1097, fascinatingly enough, King Henry allowed and makes an official edict that they're allowed to return once again to Judaism. Sorry, Jeff, I've just mute you for a second there. So were they made? Not necessarily. I don't think that they. The German Emperor Henry IV issued an edict in 1097 allowing the forcibly converted Jews to return to their faith, which may explain a lot of what takes place in the Inquisition in 1492 when you have all the Jews converting and then being accused of actually not being from Christians. Did they become? I don't think so.
And to become a citizen, was there a piece of paper that said this was a Jew, is now a Christian, is now accepted as a citizen, or
No.
not accepted? I mean, who knew what?
Well,
Just shaved off your beard and was that it?
You shaved off your, no, well, not necessarily. You weren't allowed to eat meat on Friday night. You only had to eat
etc.
Yeah. But remember, when it comes time for the second Holocaust, and I'm calling it the second Holocaust on purpose, because what took place in England in the 12th century was recounted by one of the Christian viewers as the Holocaust was so bad that it took us till the next day to continue murdering them. They referred to it then as a Holocaust, which is referred to as a burnt offering. So, but we know what happens in the European Holocaust in the 20th century. Whether you converted or not, it made no difference whatsoever. And this could have been German families that had converted 3 generations ago. Made no difference. Whether converting in 1096 gave you citizenship, I highly doubt it. Yes, sir.
You're saying killing people genocide.
Yes, no, but they refer to them as a Holocaust. So we have all of these, we have these 3 accounts as to what took place there, and they describe in gruesome terms the families putting themselves to death. We have Shlomo ben Shimshon relates one of the leaders of mine saying, "Let us be strong, bear the yoke of our holy religion, for only in this world can our enemy kill us, but our souls in paradise will live eternally in the great shining reflection of divine glory. Happy are we to do his will." So there is a great movement in Europe at this point along the river, along the communities that live along the Rhine. So Mainz, Speyer, and Worms, they all, by and large, a few convert. The majority of them take their own lives. And we've got Yitzhak ben David is a parnas of the Shul. The Crusaders have already murdered his wife. It's called Scholaster. Not sure where that name comes from. Who was a daughter of Shmuel the Great. And he tries to save his children and his mother. His mother's bedridden from wounds, that they decide to convert. 3 days later, he regrets the fact that his wife's been killed, that his mother and his 3 daughters converted. He goes on to Shul, and in front of the Aron HaKodesh, slaughters them, sprinkles their blood on the Aron HaKodesh, reminiscent of the sprinkling of blood on the altar in the Beis HaMikdash. He goes home. He burns down his house with his mother inside it. He goes back to Shul, sets the Shul alight. The mob outside beg him to come out. He goes from corner to corner and saying, "No, I refuse to give in. This is what is my destiny." Shlomo ben Shimshon, who recounts this story, said, "For these things do I weep, my eyes flow with tears." Some of the other ones are even more gruesome. Unfortunately, Sylvia's just walked into the room and I will not read them to you. But if you want to, have a look at Simon Sharma's Story of the Jews, read pages 300 through to 305, and you'll get a great sense of the gravity that was taken there. This week in Shul we won't recite it, but normally we recite Av HaRachamim. That was done because of the massacres that take place at this point over here. However, there is problems. Come back to you before we get to a little bit of a nice bit. Let's have some of the England. We were asked last week what happened to the Jews of England. Just a second. Don't do that in here. Sorry. We have at this point you've got in 1189. What happens on the 3rd of September 1189? Ian, you should know that at the top of your head.
And I do, and it just slipped my mind. But was this the First Crusade? Hang on.
No, 1096.
This is the massacre by Henry II, isn't it? Or Richard I?
Actually, it's Richard I's coronation, isn't it?
Think about Richard the Lionheart's coronation. Well done, Chaya. 3rd of September 1189. Now, the historian William of Newburgh describes what took place. A group of well-intentioned Jews, leaders of their communities in places like York. York had one of the largest Jewish communities, well, the largest one outside of London. They come to London and they bring a gift for the new king. The Jews had come to England already in 1066 by William the Conqueror, and they were used to, what normally happens in Normandy and Avignon with when the king's at the coronation, you come along and you bring everything with them. Their language was Judeo-French, and their whole raison d'etre was to supply revenue funds for the kingdom. They go along, they are barred by the gates to come in, and a whole push and a shove happens, and at least 30 Jews are killed, the rest are beaten to a pulp. One who survived is a man by the name of Benedict, a Jewish guy, even though we might think of Benedict as a monk, is a Jewish guy. He lives in York. He's the agent of the moneylender, the greatest moneylender of England. Who's the greatest moneylender of England? You would have come across his name.
Aaron
Aaron of Lincoln. Aaron of Lincoln is the, and he is blamed for all of this. But with him, the community of all the York Jews, and they are badly roughed up, but they're able to escape. He then, Benedict, on his way home, unfortunately, he dies. Now, William writes that in the meantime, an agreeable rumor that the king had ordered all the Jews, the king in England, had ordered all the Jews to be exterminated, that goes through the whole of London. Another monk, Richard of Davies, says on the same coronation, at the hour at which the son was sacrificed to the father, they began in the city of London to sacrifice the Jews to the father, the devil. And there is a terrible massacre in London. And he writes, the horrible conflagration, destructive to the besieged Jews, offered light to the Christians who were raging in their nocturnal work. You know, Baruch Hashem for the fires, we're able to see how to kill the Jews because we set their houses on light. And this is when Richard of Davies, in his Latin prose, what he writes there is, it took the destroyers of the Jews so long to finish their work that the Holocaust was barely completed the second day. And that, I believe, is probably the first time we referred. Holocaust in Latin refers to a burnt offering. And that was why that name was then associated with the Holocaust, because of the burning, because of the crematorium. But it is used already in the 12th century, well, in England in 1189, because of the massacre of the Jews. But there is terrible, terrible trouble that takes place. King's Lynn, you've got in Norfolk. What happens? These are all a prelude to the blood libels. I don't think we want to spend too much time going through all of these blood libels. I was asked last week about, are there any famous rabbis? Yes, there is. We've got in York in 1190. This was on Shabbos Haggadah, the Shabbos for Pesach, 17th of March, 1190. They break in, the mob breaks into a home, kills the widow of Benedict, who was the agent of the moneylender, and there is but one family that is able to escape. Unfortunately, they go along to the warden of the castle. He lets them in, but the mob come along and everybody gets killed. Amongst them is Rabbi Yom Tov of Yogni, who was according to many, was one of the Bali Tosafos. So even though when we refer to Tosafos, we think of Rashi's grandsons, Rabbeinu Tam and his cousins, there are many others at that time who are the Bali Tosafos, Rabbi Yom Tov of Yogni, who, as I said last week, any of the great rabbis in England in the 12th century have come over from Normandy and France, as we see from his name. He had composed already an elegy for the massacred Jews of Blois 20 years earlier. He was with his family. He makes that whole famous speech, and he kills his sons, and then he kills himself. Bearing in mind, this is all taking place in 1190. Think about Rambam, who's born in 1135. We'll get to shortly, and his response to this about whether what the Jews are doing is correct. We've got the blood libels going on from York onto Suffolk, Bury St Edmunds, Norwich, over and over and over again. The blood libels, the 12th century in England, are totally, they really are terrible. Anybody been guessing, or is anybody going to confess to having gone to Lincoln Cathedral?
Oh, yes. Aaron the Jew's house down the road.
Sorry?
Aaron the Jew's house, who financed it, is down the road from Lincoln Cathedral. And with my grandmother, I went to Aleha Shalom specifically to look at the Jewish expression in Lincoln.
Yeah, but what's inside the cathedral itself?
We were able to say we're back.
Okay, you say you're back, but there is a stained glass window in the Lincoln Cathedral with the Mama, the Virgin, bending over the boy in the oven. There's a famous, they would say that the Jews would take the young boy and any of them that converted, they would throw them into the oven and burn them. and taking the story from Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or you may know a little bit better of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, all of those. I much prefer Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, but Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they take the whole Jewish story of the boys being rescued by the fire, that here they were thrown in the furnace by the father. Why? Because the mother had gone along and, in order to save the child, had him baptized, converted. The father goes mad and throws him in the oven, but along comes the Virgin Mama, and so you have the boy in the oven, and in the Lincoln Cathedral, they still have the stained glass window of this depiction of the Virgin saving the mother. The last one we have is in 1168 in Gloucester, when you've got a circumcision party, ends up in being a blood path again. It takes over 700 years for...
You go, I think it's to Norwich Cathedral. You go into the entrance hall, there's a huge Mogan Dovid carved in stone from medieval times.
Well, it's in Lincoln Cathedral where there is the Virgin with the boy in the oven.
I'll take that from you.
I will. You'll have to take it up with Simon Sharma if it's somewhere else. In Norwich, you've got else because you've got little Hugh from Lincoln, the 9-year-old boy who was discovered. But in outside Lincoln Cathedral, so in Canterbury Tales, Geoffrey Chaucer speaks about the prioress's tale. It takes 700 years before the Church of England officially repudiates the accusation of the murder of little Hugh, and the site of his tomb there is a fraternal interfaith, and they say shalom. Thank you very much. After the murders and the things for centuries, the 12th century was the worst. Of course, in 1290 we then kicked out, and we don't come back for another 400 years. But from the beginning of the First Crusade, 1096, until that entire next century, it's terrible. Maybe being kicked out might have been one of the good things to have happened to us. I'm going to leave massacres alone for the moment. There is just one short thing, because we mentioned the other week about the women of Ashkenaz, and there's a whole chapter here on famous women of what they achieved, and there was an interesting piece of halacha that happens over here as to being a tzaddik. The mother allowed to be the tzaddik of her own son's bris milah, until it takes till the 13th century, when you've got Remer of Rothenburg, who Remer of Rothenburg, we'll see later on, quite famous. He gets taken and held ransom. He refuses to allow his ransom to be paid. He ends up dying in captivity, and his body is kept in the castle for another 13.
It's 14.
Another 7. He's held in captivity for 7 years. He dies and he's kept for another 7 years, so 14 years in total. He refused to allow a ransom to be paid, because he said if they do, then they'll keep on him. It's good business to take the Jews. But so it's not until his time that they forbade the mother from acting as a tzaddik. The reason being is because, David, what might it lead to? Mixed dancing. But people didn't know.
I could read my lips there, sorry.
Yeah. So he said, even if there's one Rav called the Tashbetz, Reb Shimon ben Zamka Doran, he said, in case when the moil is leaning over, and especially at one point after you do the bris milah, you have to do the metzitza, which is you literally suck the blood in order to start the flow, which he puts his mouth on, but he's bending. There's going to be a little bit too much temptation, even if the moil is the father of the baby and the husband of the sandik. Not, and they said, nobody will know some, that gets banned. But in the 11th and 12th century, it seems it was quite common for the mother to act as it, and you have a number of very strong-willed women at that time. Yes. All right, then. Let us leave them alone for the moment and go over to Spain. But just before we do, there are repercussions because of the Second Crusade in 1150. There was no gathering of the rabbis after the First Crusade, and instead, in 1150, Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, born at the turn of the century to 1100, he's 50 years older. He, together with his older brother Reb Shmuel Rashbam, called together a synod. Now, normally when we say the word synod, we think of the church's gathering. This was the Jews all gathering together, the Jewish communities of France and Germany, to all meet in Troyes in order to deal with what had taken place after the Second Crusade. As I say, there wasn't one after the First Crusade, so it's probably for that as well. And we have a number of phenomenally great, even if for most of us unknown, but some phenomenally great scholars all gathered together, and a number of edicts are joined in. I'm sorry. Yes, you've got 25 minutes. Please, door shut. Shut the door. In and out, can't have that. And there are a number of edicts made. We only have one or two of them that are kept behind. One of them, one of the most famous ones, is an excommunication of any Jew who brings a fellow Jew to a non-Jewish court. So if you go now, that doesn't mean that somebody has committed a crime, and it often says, "Oh, you're a Moisa." It came up recently in when child abuse was coming. Are you allowed to go to the courts? And the answer was given by Chief Rabbi, by the Dayanim in London, by the Dayanim in Manchester. And I remember I think we were still in Newcastle, so it was 10 plus years ago. And we were at a meeting together, and the Dayan said, and even though, unfortunately, it doesn't always work out, he says, I'd much rather somebody goes through the humiliation of a false accusation. If they are taka innocent, they recover from it, then one child gets abused. He says, unfortunately, that then got turned around, and the accuser is always automatically believed, and the weight of evidence, as personally we've seen, doesn't have to be that great at all, and people's lives can be totally destroyed. And in fact, in some aspects, people have turned it on its head, and you've got people who are using the threat or the accusation of being accused of being an abuser to actually abuse somebody by saying, right, unless you do this and the other, I'll just make a claim. And sometimes, there's no smoke without fire, and people's lives, livelihood, and marriages can get ripped apart. But that's not what we're talking about over here. Here we're talking about you've got a debt between somebody, and in order to get the money back, you're going to go along to a non-Jewish court. He said is not allowed to do that, and the only way you could be brought back in the fold is to go along. Either you've got to redeem that friend, go along to the courts, you've got to indemnify them and say, I retract what I said there, and you've got to get the 7 best men of the city in order to allow you to come back in. And once he was excommunicated, he couldn't be threatened. He couldn't then threaten this is what I was going to do. And anybody who violates the decrees is going to be excommunicated. His bread will be considered as the bread of a Samaritan, not kosher. His wine will be considered as sacramented wine from a non-Jew, libation to idols. His books are of a magician. Whoever speaks with him will be excommunicated the same way. If out of the fear of the government he speaks with a short time, then he's not really banished. But if you have any communication with somebody who's been excommunicated, imagine how that works. You've got a small shtetl, you've got a small town, and this is a real threat. You're being excommunicated, no one can talk with you, no one can eat with you, no one can read your books. If you're selling wine or bread, no one can buy it. It was a threat, quite a serious threat, so people were not going to be going in. There are a number of ones of exceptions to the rule that may have come along. There was one other edict which was or was not held, which was the power of the Kehillah. Rabbeinu Gershon, who we learned about the other week, said that if the community makes a decree and it's voted upon by the majority of the community, it has the law. There are not many such communities left like that. Gateshead is in England is probably the only one. If the as a town, you've got different shuls. Look, we had it here. The community voted. It had to be a 2/3 majority. Community voted to change the constitution. That now nobody can say it's not fair. You lost. You lost. It has to be done by majority. Rabbeinu Tam wanted that change to be totally unanimous. Now, unfortunately, getting unanimous across the entire community is going to be impossible. But and so those who are looking back trying to understand this thing, what Rabbeinu Tam was trying to do is that how can you have a unanimous one? Jewish logic. If you have a Sanhedrin, then the Sanhedrin are viewed as being the mouthpiece of every individual. So if your Sanhedrin says, this is what we say, then that is deemed as if everyone in the community has said the same thing. And so therefore, once you convince the Sanhedrin that this is the law, the Sanhedrin declare it, it doesn't even have the power. So it's not only the power of the majority, it's the power of a unanimous vote. And what some are looking at saying that what Rabbeinu Tam was trying to do was to give authority to a Beis Din in each and every city to be able to pass laws that have the authority, not just of a majority, but an authority of a unanimously held law. You've got, by the time it comes to the Maram Ben Baruch of Rottenberger, he rules 3 different ways. In one response, he goes back, Rabbeinu Gersh, you need to have a majority. And another one, like Rabbeinu Tam, when he's in prison, he goes back again to like Rabbeinu. So as it so happens, we go along and we follow majority. We do not demand a unanimous verdict amongst them. And the last one that I want to say of what they did include is they write about a dowry. In the name of the king, as decreed by rabbis who reside in Narbonne, and we go through all of this here, anyone who marries a woman who dies within 12 months without leaving a viable offspring has got to return the dowry to the father's house or any other heirs that she may have. And he's got to return it within 30 days. And we have restricted this to the first year of marriage. For after that, a long time person forgets what they're given and will not be saddened by it. And it's signed by Yaakov ben Meir, Rabbeinu Tam, Yitzhak ben Baruch, and Menachem ben Peretz. They wanted to, because otherwise, people did having somebody pass away in the 30s, 40s, was not unheard of. And if somebody, and it also stops anybody being slightly unscrupulous of marrying somebody and then quietly doing away with them with the first year of marriage, but they've got the whole dowry. So if she doesn't leave behind viable offspring, because if she leaves behind viable offspring, then again it is. So that's Europe.
No, forgive me, troubling. Coming back to the expulsion of the Jews from England in 1290.
Yes.
Why were we expelled?
Irrelevant, because that's 1290. That's next week. We only went up to 1198 with Richard the Lionheart. So I'm going to have, this week is the 12th century. We'll have to do that next week. So I've got a week to find the answer.
There's a follow-up question, just to give, the follow-up question is the 100 Years' War started in about 1340. How did England finance it? And am I right in drawing the inference we lost the 100 Years' War against France because they had the Jewish bankers and we didn't? Well,
the good thing about that is they've got 2 weeks, because that doesn't happen until 1340. That's in 2 weeks' time. But
I give you a fair warning.
We've only got 15 minutes left, and there is
fair enough
a major person who we must look at this week, born in 1135, Reb Moshe ben Maimon Maimonides. And we were given, just saw it yesterday, we were given by a neighbor over the road, gave us a little pin, which has got a handwritten inscription on it. And it's got on the side of it, it's written in English, Italian, Spanish, and German, that this is the pin of Nachmanides, Reb Moshe ben Nachman. There's only one problem. The Hebrew reading of it is definitely Reb Moshe ben Maimonides. And literally, I was tying it to this. I said, nothing. This is a bit strange here. The English says it is from Ramban, but in Hebrew it is definitely Rambam. But we will do Ramban hopefully next week. This week is going to be Rambam, Reb Moshe ben Maimon. Reb Moshe ben Maimon, born in Cordoba. Last week, you remember we had the Rif, who is born in Morocco, born in Egypt, moves over to Morocco, Fez, and then up to Cordoba. Rambam does a journey entirely in reverse. Starts off in Cordoba, has trouble there from the Almohads come along and make life unbearable. They move down to Fez, where his father decides to live, which was a hothead of the Almohads, but eventually they have to move along. Rambam ends up in Egypt by way of Israel. He goes along to Israel, but it is too dangerous, so he ends up living in Egypt. Reb Moshe ben Maimon is a child prodigy. Already at the age of 6, he's taken on to the Rimi Gash, we looked at last week, who was the spiritual leader of the Jews in Spain, and he's already, he attributes a lot of his knowledge to a bracha that he's given them. We will leave all of his troubles and how he has to flee, but by 1150, he's born in 1135, by 1150, he already has to leave Cordoba, and he moves along, and they are told either they've got to convert or leave. Where do they go to? They go along to Fez. And there's an important thing here. They are still under the Almohads. At this point, the Almohads state that all Jews living there had to convert. But they only have to convert openly. And everyone knew that the Jews could convert to Islam, but privately, they were allowed to live as Jews. Nobody cared. And you have the head of the Jewish community was a famous Talmudical scholar who'd come from Babylon by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Cohen ibn Susan. He is an outward Muslim. He is a Rosh Yeshiva. And no, he's got this internal persona. Outside of the street, he walks around and is greeted as Salam Alaikum. He's a faithful Muslim. Whenever he mentions the Almighty's names, Rahman al-Rut, when he goes at home, he acts as a Rosh Yeshiva.
You know, you've just given the solution to the Middle East issue, haven't you? All the Jewish settlements on the West Bank should go down that road.
I would have thought that somebody who's always championed human rights would see the disgraceful concept that there can only be a state, a Palestinian state on the West Bank, if it is Yud and Rhein. Jews are not allowed to live here. Why was it that when Hamas took over Gaza Strip, Jews were not allowed to live there? The only place in the world where Jews are banned from living is in areas that were once Israel. If you want to have a state, have a state. But why do you need to kill the Jews who are living there? Let them stay. Let's leave politics alone. But to say that Jews should be kicked out of there, give them a land, fine. But why does that land? You know what? We'll do that on one condition. If all of the Palestinians, every non-Jew leaves the area that they leave to us, they go there, we get here. That would be for them, as Ian, as you always said, Jews for the Judaism, Christianity for the Christians, will have all of Israel for the Israelis and all of Palestine for the Palestinians. But so anyway, sorry, you started me off on something which you shouldn't draw me into them, Ian, because we've got 9 minutes left and we've got to finish off with Rambam.
Calm down, Rabbi, calm down.
Yeah, but it's so annoying that people perpetuate this concept here that Jews have got to, that we are the settlers. Fine, let them settle. I'm allowed to own property in Bowden. Why can't I own property in the West Bank? Just because I'm Jewish? So anyway, David, who are you saying to calm down? Calm down, my dear. Calm down.
Calm down.
Yeah. So Maimonides, his father, Rambam, they are allowed to be openly Jewish, mainly because they were already known as a famous family. They weren't allowed to flaunt it, but Rambam sees here very much what it means to have to live in both worlds. Remember what I said happened in Christian Europe and in England when the choice was given, a lot of them took martyrdom. Rambam, he's not yet 20. He writes a book called Explaining Philosophical Terms. In his early 20s, he starts to write the commentary on the Mishnah. The commentary on the Mishnah finished written in 1168 is when he completes it. It's written in Arabic, in Hebrew letters. He was upset that is why he's actually done it, but he wanted it to be accessible to all of the Jews, the Sephardic Jewish world. He regretted later on that he didn't write it in Hebrew, but he didn't have time to write it out again. But it is written in Hebrew letters, but in the Arabic language. And if that alone would have made Rambam famous, he takes the Mishnah and he writes a commentary on the entire Mishnah, he would have had scholarly immortality. But it's more than that. He does the next thing. In 1163, leading members of the Jewish community of Fez all publicly were following Islam. They asked a great scholar at the time, what should they do? Should they continue in that behavior? The scholar, who will remain nameless, writes back telling them what a disgrace it is. They should rather be prepared for martyrdom for it. And a number of them, they basically had one of two choices. Either they prepared for martyrdom, or they said, well, if our public-private life is being ridiculed, we cannot legally, publicly live a life as a Jew. Let's lead our private life as a Muslim as well. We asked the rabbis, they told us it's a waste of time. So let's leave our private life as a Muslim as well. Rambam is not yet 30. He gets involved. For the only time ever, he includes within his arguments an ad hominem attack on the author of the previous one. His letter is known as Igeres Hashmad, the letter regarding apostasy, and he writes there without, not personal rancor from himself, but a personal strong case. And he characterizes a scholar advocating martyrdom as insensitive to the true light of his brethren, ignorant of correct halachic interpretation, and exhibiting poverty of good sense. He says that the dual behavior of the Jews under Muslim persecution, he defends them, he comforts them, and he says, put up with it. If this is what you have to do, leave, have a personal life as a Muslim, has a public life as a Muslim, a personal life as a Jew. Bear in mind, Rambam has experienced the Almahad terror himself in Cordova. He's living in Fez, where it catches up with him. Why his father lived there might have been a concept of real Jewish chutzpah. I'm not going to be defeated, I'm going to stay here. But he now is not just seen as a scholar, but also a leader of his people. By 1165, he decides to escape from Fez, and they start to go to Israel. They dock at Akka in the north of Israel. Along the way, there's a terrible storm, which was on the 10th of Iyar. He keeps that as a personal fast day. They arrive in Israel on my wedding anniversary, which was when? 3rd of Sivan, and that became for him as a personal Purim, a personal Yom Tov. Israel at that point was, of course, under Christian rule, the rulers from the First Crusade. Right. Jews traveling by themselves was very dangerous, but Rambam is treated like royalty. He's protected by others, but he decides it's not a place for him to go, and he goes down to Egypt in 1166. He is at this point 31 years old. what the
The
man had achieved.
The Rambam in one of his books says you must not live in Egypt.
Wait a second. Now, Rambam definitely felt uncomfortable in that book. One of his descendants, a man by the name of Shmuel, Rabbi Shmuel, said that whenever Rambam would sign his letters, he would sign it, signed by me, Moshe ben Maimon, who every day violates 3 negative commandments of the Torah, which is 3 times the Torah forbids a Jew to go back to Egypt. Rabbi Yaakov Emden and others deny that story. No letters of those remain. Absence of proof is not proof of absence. We don't know why somebody would make that. We don't know, but definitely Rambam does have this internal strife within him as to whether what he was doing was correct. It's not Rambam who writes it. Rambam is only codifying what the Torah tells us. The Torah tells us 3 times. The argument put forward as to why Rambam may not have been halachically violating it is because Egypt then, definitely Egypt from the 18th century onwards, is not Mitzrayim it's the same geographical location, but it is a total different race. The problem wasn't the land, the problem was the people who subjected the Israelites to troubles in the time of Yaakov, Yosef, and then again in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash when they persecuted. We have the Amneptisteel, which is written on it, Israel is dead at sea, is no more. That's from the time of the first Beit HaMikdash. But by the time we get to the 12th century, it's definitely a different nation, and that's the answer sometimes given as to why he could do. Rambam, though, once he's there, he has a number of personal tragedies. His wife, his 2 sons, and his father die within 2 years. He gets driven mad, and in 1169, when he is 34 years old, his beloved brother David passes away at sea. David was the financier of the family. He had wealth. He gets lost at sea together with the whole family, and Rambam decides to start practicing medicine. He becomes the physician to the Emperor Saladin, and he is removed from all financial responsibilities and is able to write 2 books at this point, which were his most famous books. One of them is the Mishnah Torah, the Yad HaChazakah, the 14 volumes which go through all of the mitzvahs in the Torah and explain them. It's the first real codified book of law that contains everything. If you finish the entire Talmud and you finish the entire Rambam, if you have one person that knows all of the Talmud, another person that knows all of the Rambam, the person that's learned all of Rambam will know more halacha than the person that's learned the entire Talmud. At the quickest, doing an entire double-sided day, Daf Yomi will take you a whole 7 years to do it. If you do Rambam at the quickest, which you can do it in just under a year, yet you will have more halacha. There are numerous areas of halacha that are not included within the Talmud. Rambam decides he's going to put it all down. Even though Rambam says, once you have my book, you will not have to have any other one, more commentaries have been written on Rambam than on any other book. Even today, every year, tens of books are written, Sefarim written, explaining Rambam's. And when we say Rambam, even though Rambam wrote a commentary in the Mishnah, as we'll soon see, the Guide for the Perplexed, and numerous other ones, when you say Rambam, what we mean is his Mishnah Torah, literally Mishnah, second to the Torah. He said, learn Torah Shebechsav, learn the Chumash, and then go straight to Rambam to get all of the halacha. It's not without its controversy, as we'll see next week. They burn Rambam in exactly the same place they burn Rambam. Later on, they then go and burn the Talmud, and with everything that goes on from there. Just to finish off is the Moira Nevuchim. The Moira Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, as it is written. Rambam he's a philosopher, but he's also a rationalist. Yes, he does follow some of Aristotle, but he's not an Aristotelian. He diverges from Aristotle. Why? If Aristotle was 4th century BCE, In the 12th century CE, 1600 years later, for some reason, all of the views of Aristotle are quite, that seemed to be the vogue at that point. Rambam picks up on that, and he wants to explain within his Moreh Nevuchim every physical, natural, social, and historical phenomenon in a logical and rational way without having to take recourse to the mystical and supernatural. To Rambam, Hashem was in natural and rational, and you don't need to look for him in the miraculous and the inexplicable. Yes, he was fighting a little bit against Aristotle, and what he's trying to show is that even if we are taking the natural, those must be put within light of the Torah as well. Aristotle, Moreh Nevuchim was very much accepted in its time, but because now most from Jews will not accept Aristotle, the Moreh Nevuchim is not really learned amongst your black-hatted Orthodox Jews. Modern Orthodoxy, yes, you're slightly more small L liberal Jew. When I say small L, I don't mean Reform. We're talking about a wider thinking Jew, somebody who is able to see it for a wider picture, will look at Moreh Nevuchim. It's not taught in yeshivas, by and large, it's normally left for later on. But as anybody has been to, and then Rambam passes away in 1204, he passes away. His last 9 years of his life are a little bit of pain for Rambam, because Saladin passes away in 1193, and even though Rambam chose the right son, he chose Al-Fatzal, the oldest son of Saladin, and it was good for him. Nevertheless, he has bad health for the last decade or so of his life, and he passes away in 1204 in Fostat. He's taken to Tveria, Tiberias, where he's buried there, and the epitaph on his tombstone is Moshe ad Moshe lekom Moshe, from Moshe Rabbeinu until Moshe ben Maimon, nobody arose like Moshe. That takes us to the very end of the century. We've gone a little bit over because we've gone into 1204. Next week, we will be doing the 13th century. We've got a number of the Crusades. We have the Jews being kicked out of England. We may see of the repercussions that have, but we've also got Jews who are allowed to go back to Jerusalem, which actually happens right at this time after Richard the Lionheart is killed in France and succeeded by King John. Saladin reconquers Jerusalem, and he allows the Jews to go back to Jerusalem. We didn't really make mention of that this week. And I did tell you I would mention Benjamin of Tudela, who was the Jewish Samuel Pepys, but unfortunately, we don't have enough time for that. And that takes us to the end of this week's century. Next week, we've got lots of burnings that take place, burning by Jews and burning of Jews' books by non-Jews. Ian, we might even answer the question next week about what happened in 1290. Who knows? We'll see what we can do.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. See you. If Shul tonight, of course, is at 7:30. Shacharis in the morning is at